All right, here we go. All right, part of the assessment, what I want to get to is when you get to your job, right, and you're starting working either in a public sector or private sector, working in healthcare, you're working even in something, whatever you're doing, even like personnel selection, like in an HR department, you're going to have to deal with assessing people's personalities, right? And that's a big part of assessment. Is this person right for here? Do they fit in with the team and its goals and all that kind of stuff? So you may have the most technical skills ever, but if you're not the kind of person who works well within the group, within the dynamic, then it's like all done. And you're going to be called upon to kind of make some of those choices and some of those decisions. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about personality. I know some of you guys have probably taken personality undergraduate, even graduate, right? And personality classes like this and that, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we don't have to delve that far into the story. But let's talk about personality. First of all, we need a definition of what personality is. And I like that term constellation. I think that's a very new and hip term. An individual's unique constellation of psychological traits. Sounds so galactic. But this is our traits that make us up. And these are the dimensions that we look at. Introversion, extroversion, depression, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you noticed that Aaron Beck just died like a month or two ago, like the granddaddy of depression. I wonder if they're going to have a celebration of life for him. All right, but neither here nor there. All right, part of this is I have to entertain myself too. I've been doing this for a lot of years. So, okay, so how do we assess personality? It says it right there. We have to find measurement tools. We have to find tests, scales, and all that kind of stuff that allows us to tap into those dimensions. So backtracking a little bit, what does that tell us? It tells us that these different characteristics, traits, attributes, give it a name, call it what you want, had to have been reliably found. So there's a reliability issue. And of course, there's a validity issue. So when we talk about depression, we use the Beck scale or anything that's normed out, we know that we're tapping into that dimension. We take it for granted. It's a given, right? And when we talk about introversion and extroversion and locus of control, all of these things have been validated, right? They've all been done that way. And that's what we're talking about in terms of the personality assessment. And then we look at Guilford. Guilford was a very popular theorist. Guilford was a very popular theorist and psychologist in the late 50s, early 60s, even into the 70s. Where he was a big personality guy, and he was really trying to talk about traits, right? Looking at the qualitative emphasis of what a trait is. So we know we have a dimension of, let's say, introverted people and extroverted people, and we go on that continuum. He was kind of working in the area of saying, like, okay, how do we find that one? How do we find that one significant characteristic? Because we all go along that dimension at some point. If you walk into a room with strangers, you're not busting out into song, right? You're much more reserved, you're much more quiet. If you're among friends or at a baseball game, you can be like the loudest, most boisterous person. But he's saying, where's the middle part? And how do we distinguish that of what is enduring, as he puts it, right? What is really the primary trait on that? Moving right along, you have this guy, John Holland, who talked about personality types. Once again, he uses that term constellation, which I really got heard of. And looking at, but I have heard of taxonomy. You guys know what a taxonomy is? So, sort of, yes. It's like the big bucket of personality types, of dimensions. That's a taxonomy, right? It's like the big bucket of which it falls into. And within the bucket, there can be different degrees of characteristic of what that is. So what he's saying, a personality type, is really an amalgam of many different traits, many different attributes. And when are they presented? They're presented under an environmental condition of when it's appropriate, allegedly, right? Because we know how to act in school, right? You guys sit there and take notes and zoom out to the Bahamas. I stand up here and I do my thing, right? And when I'm having you know, tomorrow night, after my work week is done and I go out and I have a cocktail with my wife, I mean, I'll act a little differently when I'm sitting, you know, at the bar or the restaurant, right? So it's a whole different, so my taxonomy have a different kind of personality trait for that stuff, as well as you guys too. Holland, who did a lot of work and more meta-analytical work, he characterized it down to 6 personality types. And these 6 personality types, believe it or not, are still used today. All right. So he took all this stuff and he said there are these 6 independent or orthogonal dimensions. Have you ever used the word orthogonal here? It's an H, orthogonal. All right, if I ask a question, someone give me an answer. I can't read minds, okay? This is I like, you know, we're kind of relaxed here today. All right, so it's orthogonal or independent, right? Have you ever seen the word orthogonal?
No.
It's my, thank you. It's my favorite word in all of social science. And all it means, because it makes you look smart, all it means is that independent. So a lot of these traits, even though they kind of blend into each other and kind of mix the paint, if you will, they're still primary traits. So they're independent, right? So orthogonality means independence, but there's also this kind of mixture of all of them. And that's what Holland was kind of looking at. And that's the scale he did, the self-directed search test, self-administered, self-scored, and once again, looking at what? Vocational assistance. This is a whole big thing in the private sector. They used to call it industrial organizational psychology. You guys ever heard that term? Like those guys, I don't know what they call it now. They don't use that term anymore, I know. But these are folks who sit there and go, okay, we need to find someone who has the traits, let's say, to figure out electronic stuff. So we give them physical tests to figure out that kind of stuff, like the way different gears work, and they say, okay, which way is this gear going? I had a friend who used to do that kind of work. Okay, so it's that kind of stuff. So this is what you identify as. I don't know when you guys were in high school. They did it when I was in high school. Like the military would come in and give you like an aptitude test. Yes, does this still happen on occasion? Yeah. Okay. So my buddies and I, we took the test, and and they said, here's what you're more geared towards. I took the test and they sent me back the results. They said, you're more geared towards X, Y, and Z. My friends were geared more towards A, B, and C. My friends thought they were so bright, they ended up saying well, they should be like in a motor pool, or they should be like clerk divers. Not to show off or anything, they said I would be pretty good for more analytical work. Even back then, I was annoying. So that's I didn't go into the military, but I said, okay, here I have a pathway, to go to school and all that. So that's what he did. He found these different personality types, and he developed a test, and he normed it out where he could use these 6 dimensions to figure out what the strengths are with people, what their primary traits are, and see how they could fit towards different needs of a company or different needs of where they need to be. Okay. Let me just move forward a little bit. Okay, personality types. Everybody's heard of type A and type B, yeah?
Yes.
Right? Remember as a young man, I wanted to move to California, and a friend of mine and I came back to New York about 8 months later, and they said, why'd you come back? And I said, because I'm a type A personality and type B environment. So it just did not work. Seriously, it did not work. So I'm much more, we're New Yorkers, so it's we don't have patience. Here, people have patience. I'm not trying to be too glib, but think about it. I remember renting a car from Hertz, and I'm going to the guy where's my car? The guy's going so slow. I mean, I still complain about this today. Let's go while I'm young. I'm still young. So anyway, I don't have any patience. I don't have any of this. Feelings being time pressure, the gotta get going. Right, these are primary traits that have been identified by Friedman and Rosenman to talk about these different personality traits. Granted, they're large buckets. Okay, so it's like a really broad swath that they're doing. He's not drilling down into the bucket, but it's identifying different things. And don't forget, when you start to look at personality assessment, you got that person sitting across from you, and you're starting to chat with them, you're starting to build a picture of who they are, what they are. And you always have to remember when they come in the first few times, they're trying to give you the best appearance, right? It's the spotlight effect, they're on. You know what? Oh, me, lose my temper? Impossible, right? But they're there for an anger management. Okay, so it's been documented. But the point is, once again, without the glibness and the snarkiness, you're going to have to start to delve in and drill down through the surface to see what's driving the model. And a good way to do that is start looking at the 6 different, characteristics that he found, and then putting it into saying, like, is it a type A person, a type B person? So a type A person isn't going to be a good person, if you will, if you're going to be doing very, work where you have to wait, like a lot of laboratory work or a lot of things of that nature. Where a type B person, much more relaxed, much more forgiving in that sense. Okay. If you need things done quickly in a fast-paced environment, like a stockbroker, you don't want a trader on the floor being a type B, right? Because you'll never make any trades. It'll be a day late and $1 short, right? You want to have the aggressive, in your face, I'm selling now kind of thing. So they have identified these 2 categories, that big categories, big buckets. But once again, type A people do have part of their personality is type B. And it's the one simple line. I work hard and I play hard, right? So even that, they relax, they have to put a whole thing together with that. Okay, here's the one I spoke about before, and there's a million slides in this deck talking about the MMPI. And we're just going to go through a broad swath of it, okay, because the MMPI is a very comprehensive piece. It's been used since it was developed in Minnesota, for like, I don't know, it's going on 60 years, 70 years, maybe, probably even longer than that. Time does fly. And let's talk a little bit about the MMPI. How many people here are familiar with the MMPI? Just a little bit? Okay, all right. The MMPI really looks to develop personality profiles. So it's called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. What does multiphasic mean? It means that it captures all the different dimensions, okay, of personality, because we all have that. We know there's like over 450 items on the test, right? And there's always been some issues about having what they call a practice effect. You're not as aware from, on question number 300 as you paid attention on question 20. All right, so you kind of zone out a little bit. So this is looking at personality, looking to get personality profiles off these things, and there are subscales that are used to validate different personality states. So we have there the definition of a personality state, a transitory exhibition of some personality trait, a relatively temporary predisposition. What does that mean in English? It means we react within the environment we're in, right? There was a researcher named Bernie Weiner, and he kind of outlines his way around this by combining different personality traits and looking at this personality state. And he is what they call looking at attribution. What does this mean in English? This is a little bit of a tangent, but I want to kind of put it in there to kind of get a full coloration of the discussion. He would say that people will respond in a typical way, but it has to be under the proper conditions, right? Just as I was talking about reliability and validity, they have to be under the same proper conditions, all right? So if you're a little bit shy and you go to a mixer or you go to a cocktail party, right? You're going to be a little bit more reserved until you figure it out, right? That's going to happen anytime and everywhere. Under those conditions, you go into kind of withdrawal a little bit. If you're the person who puts the lampshade on their head and goes around, well, guess what? You're always going to do that under those conditions, the likelihood. Yeah.
One day you use the sort of the MMPI for job interviews.
We'll get there. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. So it's not just the MMPI standing out there by itself. It's used as part of a toolkit, right? To say like, okay, I'm going to look at the personality state, this kind of transitory thing, and some of those questions on the MMPI talk about that. You know, when I was a child, I would do X, Y, and Z, looking at those things, looking at that and going through this whole thing. Okay, and the second one there is the measuring the personality states, looking at the strength of that trait. So not only do we have identified the trait, let's say introversion, extroversion, or some sort of personality disorder, what we're also looking at is how strong is it? What is the magnitude of it, the depth or the intensity of it? All right, you have certain people who are always very quiet. That's how they're normal, right? That's a very strong approach on that dimension. You have other people who are much more ebullient, kind of going around. Okay, so you try to get a handle on that to put it all in some context of what is going on here. Okay, personality, some basic questions. Why assess it? Identify determinants of knowledge about health. Do people have a healthy psyche? Are they not, I don't want to say neurotic or psychotic or whatever, somatic, whatever. All right, so you're trying to get an indicator of the status of their mental health. Different types of commitments in intimate relationships. Finding out about those dimensions, all right? Interactions among people. Okay, peer response to a team's weakest link. We had a little bit of a discussion in class about that. And we were talking about, you know, if you're working within a group, you'll have a number of people who wish to be the leader, number of people who want to be the worker bees, and then you'll have other people that are called social loafers, which are the ones who, like myself, would say, all right, you need pencils? I'll get you more pencils. You need coffee? Okay, I'll go coffee. I'll do coffee. That'd be my contribution, okay? So everybody has a role to fulfill, and that is a kind of stable, consistent attribution that we have, or characteristic that we have. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say that. And some of this is a little too much. The next to last one is important, tracking trait development over time. People are not static, people are dynamic. Are you the same person you were 5 years ago? Absolutely not. Am I the same person I was 10 years ago? No. All right, everybody kind of changes and grows and morphs into something else. All right, I don't think anybody would have liked me 20 years ago when I came out of school. So, you know, I had a bad attitude. Okay, so there you have to track development over time in a longitudinal way. Studying some uniquely human characteristics such as moral judgment. This is the Kohlberg thing, right? You guys remember Kohlberg? No? No? Okay, let me tell you what Kohlberg did. Kohlberg was involved with moral development, and that's a trait and a characteristic that changes over time, right? So Kohlberg was looking at children and their moral development. There's another writer at Harvard named Carol Gilligan, and she said, and she wrote a book like condemning Kohlberg a little thin book, but whatever. This was big when I was going to school. All right, so now it's like in the historical annals. But Kohlberg said people have moral developments. They start off on a very basic level, and it goes up to the highest. And at the highest, it would be like, as he said, it was Gandhi and himself only made the highest level of moral development. So I think some of us would say that he was a little bit narcissistic. But anyway, what Kohlberg did to look at this trait and to study it, you know, such as moral judgment, what he did was he had little essays that he would read to children and even to adults. And you probably remember this one. This is like the most infamous one. It went something like, Dieter lives in a small town in Germany. His wife is very sick. A pharmacist, you guys remember this kind of? A pharmacist in the town has developed a drug that can cure her, but the drug is $15,000. Dieter asked the pharmacist if he would give it to him, and the pharmacist says no. Later that evening, Dieter breaks into the pharmacy, steals the drugs, and gives it to his wife. Was Dieter wrong? Doesn't get moral judgment. Okay, so then Kohlberg would get all that data and see how that would change over time and asked all these different scenarios. That's just one. One child answered Kohlberg and said, "Oh, yeah, he was right to break in." And it was like, and Kohlberg said, "Like, why do you say that?" He goes, "Well, who else is going to take care of Dieter and clean his house and make him dinner and do all that stuff?" So I always kind of remember that. So I tell my wife, "I am Dieter. You got to take care of me." Kidding. But I'm just saying that's the moral development. That's the first level of moral development. Okay. So this is a trait that can be tracked over time. This is a trait that can be measured. This is a dimension where you get that. That's why they talk about sociopaths and psychopaths and all that kind of stuff, because you can actually go in there and measure it. And in the Nuremberg trials after World War II, they were able to talk to the Nazi prisoners and get a sense of their moral judgment and their moral development. Okay, and that led to Milgram's work. So assessing personality is not just a way of saying like, oh, this person has these characteristics and whatever, and here's a job that's suited for them. But it also develops into like how society, and how our culture can somehow be shifted by understanding problematic areas and focusing on. So it has a much bigger wheel that it has to, that it goes with. All right. I know I'm a little bit around everything, but I'm a big picture kind of guy. So who is being assessed and who is assessing? Well, we're hopefully assessing. And once again, as I've said from day one, hour one, when we have another person sitting on the other side of the desk, we got to check ourselves at the door. Whatever Louis Vuitton luggage we have stays out there, and we have to work at it. And it's hard because the perspectives that we take are always influenced based upon our past experiences. But you got to work really hard to be much more objective. Okay? Our own luggage and our own baggage, that's what we got to deal with. But we have to check it at the door because we got to help somebody else who's in not as good shape or functioning as well as we are. Okay? That's like my moral thing. But that's what we're saying. Who's being assessed? Some methods rely on self-reporting. I'm not a big fan of self-reporting. Why? People lie. Right? They want to be seen in a good light. So self-reporting is a good way to start, but not particularly, that kind of thing. Responding to interviews and questions. That's much better when you poke and probe, because you can continually poke and probe, and you can ask people things in many different ways and see if you're getting similar responses to similar questions. Because if you ask enough times, the truth is going to bubble up to the surface, and then things like that are going to happen. Okay, some other forms of personality is like a third-party intervention here. We talk to like, so how's little Jimmy doing in class? Is he still, talking to other children? Okay, so you can ask other people to get information from them. But once again, you have to be careful, because what I think would be an outburst may not be considered an outburst by other people. All right, so once again, it's from people's perspectives. You have to get much more information, separate more wheat from the chaff. I know, sadly, and I don't even know what the story is yet, but that story in Michigan with a high school student, grabbed a gun and he was like shooting people. It's like, it's like just amazing. Like, and the administration brought him in to talk to him and all that. And it's like, wow, there was a misstep somewhere there. Maybe not. I don't know. But that's the kind of things we're talking about. You talk to your teachers, your peers, your parents. Okay. And you have to collect all that little tidbits of information. Like Hansel and Gretel walking through the forest, picking up little gingerbread pieces, So then we have to create this big picture about it. All right, hang in there. Self-reporting methods are common. People keeping journals, people doing this stuff. All right, we have to look at self-concept, how we see ourselves in the world, right? How rigid we are with different things, looking at how flexible we are in different things. Okay, I have a friend of mine, and it's impossible to talk to him, because if he doesn't think that something is right, it can't be right. And I kind of tell him it's like a narcissism and delusions here are like too much. You know, it's like there can be alternate points of view here. What are you doing? No, can't be. Thank you, goodbye. So his self-concept, his beliefs and opinions are related about himself, and he generates it out to everyone. Okay, I guess he was told too many times that he's the brightest guy in the room. As I would say, well, you're the only one in the room. Yeah, yeah, it's tough. Okay, but it's never boring. You know what I mean? I like the action. Okay, so we have self-concept measures, how we differentiate that stuff. Basically, what we're not basically, I don't want to use that. What we're doing here in terms of personality assessment is we have this overall structure of what makes us us. And now think of it as like a big rock with ore in it, and all the little pieces of ore are personality traits. Some may have more gold, some may have more silver, some may have more zinc, some may have more nickel, right? And then what we're trying to do is chip away at that stuff to look at the composition and how we're constructed and how we've been constructed from our experiences, right? That's what these self-concept measures and the self-concept of differentiation is. The more I know on breaking apart your personality or more of your stable characteristics, the better I can build a treatment model, right? A therapeutic model to get there. Okay, that's the goal of the game. It's not just to do a test and say, oh, look, this person scored X, Y, and Z on this particular subscale. It's like, who cares? That and a swiping a Metro card gets you on the subway, right? But how do I utilize that information? You know, and it's like, you know, when I talk about statistics, everybody talks about all these highfalutin kind of philosophy things. And some of you folks who have you know this, it's like, what's more important is some of the simplest stuff is much more elegant and much more information revealing, like looking at a distribution of scores tells me a lot as opposed to doing like a whole bunch of arcane tests. This is kind of like the same thing, the same kind of psychological approach. I have a full structure. Now I need to chip away at it and start to analyze what traits are consistent, what traits are stable. Okay, how do people act under certain conditions? And that's what it's all about in order to build a better therapeutic design and approach to treating people. Because people are going to come in and they're different, right? They're different from us. You know, and we have to be the ones who are flexible. All right, but I'm not going to get into that whole philosophy. Just want to keep moving through, Here in some situations, the best available method is to find out from other parties, which is good. If you're working for the Board of Education and a principal calls up and says, send your best person down, we want to talk about, we have some behavioral problems here. Like, what are you going to do? Talk to the kids first? No, you're going to talk to the principal, you're going to talk to the teacher, you're going to talk to maybe some other kids, maybe some parents of the PTA to start to collect your information, right? To see like, why is little Johnny or little Janie acting in this particular way? Okay, I had a particular case, and you know, it's okay for me to talk about the HIPAA rules because I'm not going to divulge any names, but it was a consult, it wasn't really a consult, it was, you know, whatever. But I had some other therapist person call me up because I made a recommendation on something. And they said before they can move forward, they needed to ask me some questions. I said, okay, ask away. Okay. And like the first thing they said was, you know, based upon this behavior, you find that they like harm themselves. I said, no, this, that, and the other. And then they asked me, they must have had some information because I asked me, wouldn't answer me. He goes, did you find any evidence of like abuse? And like I said, not that I've encountered in our discussions and the work that we, you know, some of the work we've done. It was a client who had early on in the case and kind of went to a different direction. And I said, now let me ask you, what do you know that I don't know that I should be aware of? No, just asking. I said, well, if you're just asking, then you know something. I'm not going to push you. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that's going on here for you to collect that information. If I would have known if that there was some sort of abuse, I probably would have never taken the case because that's a little too intense for me. And I'm kind of at the age where I can't get involved in like long-term therapeutic treatment. You know, I got to be, you know, I got to do acute stuff, in and out, done and done. You know, I can't have a 5-year patient or a 7-year patient. Kids, I'm too old. I want to like travel. Okay, so I got to be honest, right? I was 35, I'd say, yeah, okay, let's do it. No. Is it necessary to proceed with caution when using a third party? Yeah, I just kind of mentioned all this stuff, right? Knowledge of the content and the evolution between the rater and the assessee is important. How aligned are they with what I think it is? Do the test kind of on a face content validity. Does it really make sense to me that what they're telling me that I don't think they're aligned, that might BS me or you know what I mean? Raters may vary in the extent to which they are neutral. Now remember that this guy who was talking to him on the phone, he was like a colleague, but it turns out he ended up being a friend of the family, which he should have told me. Okay, he just called me and said, like, I'm working with X, Y, and Z. And as it turns out, it's like he was literally like their neighbor or something. Well, that's not right. That's a violation to me. That's like that. So, and we know that we spoke about inter-rater reliability earlier on, right? I may see something one way. They may see it as another. They may be biased on how they interpret an event, and I may be biased on interpreting an event. Unknowingly, right? This unconscious bias that everybody's talking about these days. Okay, that's why I'm saying you have to be very aware that when you start to think about stuff, that you check yourself at the door and look at things as objectively as you can. Okay, it's not an easy skill and it doesn't happen overnight. You got to practice it. And that's why when you go into your next phase of your career, how many folks here are going to be practicing on some level, working in healthcare? Nobody wants to? Okay, but you're gonna look back in your time, you're gonna say, boy, when I first started, if I would have known now and I knew it like 5 years later, you say I would have handled things so much differently. So, it's just the way experience is. I mean, I think back about a lot of stuff that, when I was coming out as a young buck, and I go like, boy, what was I not thinking? So now you handle things a little differently when you get that experience, but you got to work at it. It's a muscle you gotta exercise it. It's an ongoing process. And the older you get and the more experience you get, the less wiggle room you have. So you have to be careful. Okay, enough of that. Let me continue. What is assessed when a personality assessment is done? Oh, look, my favorite, introversion and extroversion. Okay, traits. Consistent, stable traits that appear under the similar conditions, right? So that's a trait, doesn't go away, it stays there, but it's only expressed under those conditions. State is transitory, right? State is transitory. If you wake up in the morning and you get dressed and you leave the cave and you walk out of your apartment and it's raining, you've got the umbrella and the bus comes by and splashes you, and then you go, to Starbucks, you get a burnt cup of coffee, and then you spill it all over yourself and all that kind of stuff. That's a state, because that's not your normal state of events, right? You've had interaction with the environment and it's messed you up. You walk out of the cave in the morning, you look down at the floor and you find a 20. And you go to your Starbucks, you get a cup of coffee that's not burnt, all right? Like 1 out of every 90 cups, right? And you come in and you're like the happiest human being. That's a trait, that's a state. People tell me they have test anxiety. That's a state. Okay. Other tests focus on descriptions of behavior, usually in particular context. And I state that again, that is looking to see how people react under a certain condition to see what stable traits bubble up. Okay. That's what we're talking about, having those expressed. So we got that big rock, we're chipping away at the little different elements, and we're trying to break it all apart to see what makes everything run and how you look at the world. Okay, that's what we're looking at in these personality assessments. So ultimately, we can do what? As I repeat myself for the 3,000th time, how we can build a better therapeutic model between ourselves and the relationship here. Okay, what is assessed during an assessment, if you will? Well, let's take a look at the first one, response style. Okay, how do you answer? Okay, tendency to respond to a test or into a question, whatever. How do people interpret what they have, their response style? Some people are normally much more reserved or whatever. Impression management. Just as the term says, how do I appear to be? Okay, all those types of things. Manipulate other people's impressions of you. It's what we call a spotlight effect. Like someone will come in and put on an act of they're the sweetest, nicest person in the world. But then I always ask the question, so why were you put into an anger management program? Oh, that was such a mistake. You know, it's like, oh, it's just a misinterpretation. You know, it's like, well, okay, tell me about the misinterpretation. You know, that's what we hear. No, it's not important. You know, so there's always the avoidance thing anyway. But anyway, that's what you need to look through. You need to get your BS meter working. All right, you got to get the fully loaded model of the BS meter. You can't buy the one on Amazon. Okay, you can't buy the one that's $2.99. You got to buy the really expensive one with all the bells and whistles, because it's going to be a tool that's going to serve you well, and that comes from experience. Okay, and that's what you could say, like, you know, I'm using my insight here to say that you're not going to hold me. Okay, validity scales. Response styles can be affect the validity of the outcome. Okay, can be counted through the use of validity scales. What's a validity scale? Let's just talk about this in general. Within a test like the MMPI, you have 400 questions or so. You're going to have questions that repeat themselves for different dimensions. So you'll have a number of different questions that will tap into that dimension of, let's say, neurosis. Okay. So it's not just one question that says trying to tap into that dimension. You may have 20 questions which tap into it. The more questions you're asking, the better you're going to get of it, the clearer, the more you're going to get more clarity, because people are eventually going to have to start answering it honestly, because it's like they're just going through it. So what these validation scales do is they validate things. So you're not just asking one person, you're not asking the person just like one question on a dimension. You're asking multiple questions about a particular dimension, like neurosis or introversion, extroversion. All right. So the more questions you ask, the more they let their guard down, because eventually the truth has to bubble up. Okay. So that's what we're talking about there. If you have a question, you look somewhat confused.
I think with the MMPI, I applied for the Bureau of Portland like 3 years ago, and it was exhausting. It's a sign to make you tired. And it's like, I think it does. I mean, like, probably the results could be skewed, because at the end of the exam, you're tired and you're like, oh, whatever.
That's called practice effect. That's called practice effect. That's a real issue. Like I said, question number 120, you're not as fresh and driven as you are in question 30. It's like, okay, now I just want to get through the, I don't care. I'm still like, oh, a star pattern. Okay, yeah.
How many questions? Oh, no, like it took me actually 4 hours to answer. 4 or 3, more than 4 hours.
They gave you the MMPI?
I think it was that, because it was a lot of questions.
Like 460 questions?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, that's
And I
MMPI.
complained and I said that you should never give people this, because it's not, like, it's designed to make people really tired. It's worse than.
Well, that's part of the issue about MMPI and the norming process. It's a big knock against it. But it's a tool that's used all the time.
So can you get an honest answer from people when they're tired? No, because it's a state.
No, but this is why they use these validity scales, where eventually, if you do get a little tired or whatever, and you're trying to hide, the way you think I want you to answer, you just may say, "Oh, screw it, I'm just going to answer." Okay, let me just do it that way. So that's part of the rationale for it, I would believe. But to me, it's like I don't really kind of trust those results. They're a little too bouncy for me. But that's just me. I'm just like one person. I don't make those. That's above my pay grade, as they say. No, I'm trying to be too glib, but that's it. What agency was this?
Portland.
Yeah,
Portland.
Portland.
Oregon.
Oh, in Oregon. And this was the selection for what unit, for what, for the police? Okay, but that's, but I don't know, anybody here want to go and work for NYPD?
No.
Okay, you have to do a psych eval, for
Yeah.
NYPD.
So I remember now, it was 7 hours.
Okay, so, let's put it this way. Say what you want about police, but you're handing somebody lethal weaponry.
I did the same thing for the military.
Yeah, but so there's a reason. So they really need to delve in there, and they need to get as much information as they can to ensure. And if you look at, there's a newspaper, a civil service newspaper called the Chief Leader. You guys familiar with this newspaper? Am I the only one from a union family? Okay,
No, I'm sorry.
okay, fair enough, fair enough. You familiar with union? Yeah, okay. You'll see in there attorneys and psychologists offering their services to say rejected by NYPD or any other law enforcement agency
Yeah.
because of psych eval. Talk to us.
If you fail for instance, if you fail the US military safety belt, something's wrong, because it's designed, it's almost designed for you. Like they want you to pass. They really want you to pass.
That's an entirely different, as you can say, they need people to
They
be,
need people.
and they figure through their training
Yeah.
that they're going to, change
Figure it
behavior.
out.
And if you get washed out, they'll wash you out pretty early on in the process.
Exactly. So if people who fail psyche zones that we were able to see, it's like.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's dangerous. These are not people you want to hang around with.
Yep.
But I'm not saying like the NYPD psyche eval, that I just know anecdotally. It's very it's very difficult. The NYPD one is not an easy site, and a lot of people get bounced on that.
Mhm.
And I think you're allowed one appeal and then, whatever. But, and there was an adjunct here a number of years ago. I know his name, but I'm not gonna give his name, who was the psychologist who like oversaw all that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what I'm talking
I
about?
think I know who
Oh,
it is.
okay. Hey, nice guy. We used to hang, between class, we used to hang out in the adjunct's office and we would chat and he would just be so stressed of like, he goes, oh my God, he goes, Charlie, what I have to do. And I go like, his name, I go like, wow, that's like, that's, because he's ultimately the one who's got to sign off on it. If somebody goes rogue or something, they're gonna go back and look at him and say, what did you do? So anyway, he's a very good guy and he's very competent. And I think, and he may have retired. Oh, he's still here?
Still here.
Okay, yeah, anyway, he's very good, very good. I didn't want to get off down, I didn't want to go down this rabbit hole. But that's what he would use personality tests for. He's like, he would know all this stuff and be able to see all the things that are the tick marks where you would want to do that. Okay, so where are they conducted? Traditional sites are always school of identifying, learning disabilities, learning, hardships, academic research, lab settings, if you want to go and talk to people, medical studies, things like that, vocational selection. Also, different things like we talked about, military and law enforcement. This is John Jay, so we always have to talk about law enforcement. So this is what they use these assessments for. Now think about it. So one of the things that I was saying, you come in and you're a rock, and now I have to do a psyche eval on you. I'm not just going to give you a test and look and get a score and say, and just do a check mark, check the box and say, okay, let them go forward into the academy. I got to go and I got to break it down. I got to see how you look at the world and how you do things. What are the stable characteristics? What's your temperament and all that kind of stuff, right? Because you just can't hand people weaponry. You can't do that. It's not right. It's not safe. Okay, let me just move on. The scope of an evaluation may be very wide, right? Because you may want to take a look at what's all going on in a person's personality index. I'm a big believer in the CPI, the California. Why? Because it's like, how many questions is it? It's like 70 questions or something like that. I don't know what the version they're using now, but it's a lot shorter and it taps into some really interesting dimensions. Like it says there, like responsibility, dominance. So I'm sure in some law enforcement agencies, they're using these types of things, these kind of reduced scales to kind of see these are the dimensions that we're interested in. So if you're working like in a supermax prison, they don't need to find out whether you're introverted or extroverted. They need to like do all this kind of other stuff. Okay, they may tap into just a couple of dimensions that are much more salient to the job. I remember when I was talking to a governmental agency when I was coming out of graduate school, and they said to me, how would you be interested in joining us? I said, I don't know. They said, well, how do you feel about doing research in people's perceptions of dangerousness? How's that scary? Is that scary enough, right?
Yeah.
Right? So I said, okay, I'm kind of game. It's like I said, I was a young guy, I had attitude. And so I said, okay. And so talking about like, what do you want to do with this? And this was like for like field agents to go out there and see how much exposure and how much risk taking they're willing to have, right? And that perception of dangers. That was kind of interesting from like a social science point of view, but I kind of said, I'm too neurotic, I can't do this one. So, long story. Okay, but that's what you use these different tests for, to kind of tap into some key dimensions. A lot of things, it's like nobody cares about what some of the personality elements are, but in order to be a Gardner Supermax, you need probably to have 3, 4, or 5 dominant characteristics. Right, the ability to follow orders, I would say, is one. The ability to process, to have a process and all that, whatever it may be. They've identified that and they've built their own scales. Okay. Oh, it says right there in the last one, some instruments purport to measure a much narrower scope. Right. So I'm not interested in the whole panorama of things. I'm just looking at 3 or 4, couple of different things. How a person is, how are they assessed, how are they constructed and conducted? Here, I kind of like this picture. It's like a team building exercise. I know, they have all of these, it's very popular the last few years to have like executives go out on retreat and go through all these things. Now I have this thing with height. There is no amount of love or money that will get me to stand up on it. Seriously, I would say fire me right now, like we're done. And you think I'm kidding? I am definitely not kidding. There is no way on this God's green earth I step off a sidewalk, I'm like getting dizzy. You're laughing, but I'm just telling you, I'm not good with heights. I can go on a plane, go in an elevator, I don't care, but I just can't do it. And I know why, and I've analyzed why, and it is what it is. So they have these team building things, and that's an assessment of personality too. Who are helpers, who are leaders, who are the social loafers, okay? Who are the ones who are the take charge people, okay? Who are the ones who are the followers? The leaders and the followers. Okay, so you have that. Here, an example of theory-based instrument is that should be Blakey, not Blackey. Blakey pictures test. And here they have people, you look at a picture like this, a projective test and say, tell me what's going on here. Okay, and you can start to get the thematic work of what is, what people are thinking. Okay, oh, look at these people. Like, oh yeah, like, look at this guy. He's definitely like a follower because he's last and he's like looking out into space and he's like, they come up with all the stories. Oh, and here's Mr. Helper, trying to do this. And there's the other guy who's full, and you get all that information that's kind of flowing out from people. So you can do it like, projectively. Now, give me a few more minutes. I doubt if we'll get through all these, but that's okay. Okay, personality will be assessed face-to-face, computer, all the different ways you know them. Okay, and when you were in Portland, Oregon, taking the test, probably had everybody in a big room, right, with desks, and here's the things, and some nitwits then up there with a timer going, first section now, 40 minutes, click, right, just like your SATs and GREs and all that kind of stuff. All right, make sure you have 2 number 2 pencils and an eraser. Leave all your personal stuff in the locker. Okay, so you do all that kind of stuff. Okay, frame of reference, aspects of the focus, like where are we? Are we in the present, in the past, in the future, how people looking at things, contextual issues. I'm big into context. All right, people react in certain ways. We don't operate in vacuums, right? There's always a context. Okay, always a context. And it's important to get that context. Right? So we try to put that into the picture too and say, was this person's behavior reasonable? Is it a consistent trait? Is it a state? Okay, so these are the kinds of issues we have to decide on. Q sort. Let's talk about Q sort for 30 seconds. I don't know anybody who does Q sorts anymore. Q sorts are like from the 40s and 50s. What is a Q sort? You'd have cards, like a big deck of cards. Oversized deck, it would have like words on it. They say, put them into different piles. And then you have these different piles where there'd be like adjectives on it, like love, hate, sweet, sour, that kind of thing on different cards. And you would put them in a pile. And then how you arrange the pile, the therapist or the examiner would take the piles and start to try to make sense of what the piles mean and try to get an indicator of your visceral state. All right. You guys know who Carl Rogers is? Okay, Carl Rogers is the guy who is the father of the humanist school in psychology. He's the one who gives everybody a big hug. He died probably 20 years ago, if not more. Yeah, probably that. And he was teaching, to tell you, they kicked him out. He had an argument, well, not an argument. His colleagues at the University of Wisconsin didn't like him anymore for some reason. There was an issue. And then like he gave up his position, he resigned, but he did it like with a text message. You know, it was like, it was very dramatic and very powerful. And he couldn't like his colleagues to the face, had to do it, you know, differently. But Carl Rogers was the humanist school. Everybody's good, big hug for everybody. Okay, and eventually, you know, so he did Q-sort. Okay, nobody does Q-sort anymore. Two things we need to think about here, nomothetic and ideographic. Let's talk about that for a second, all right? Give me a few more minutes and then we'll just, you know, then we'll let you go on with that. Nomothetic and ideographic. I want you to think about it this way. What is the typical response to an event that people would have? Let's say it's watching a comedian. And a comedian tells a very funny joke. What's the typical response? Hopefully laughter, right? Hopefully there's some chuckling and laughter, right? Would you accept that as a normal response? That's what nomothetic means. It's what would we typically think somebody would do. Okay, the standard kind of response. So you see something funny, you laugh. If you saw something funny and you just cried and became very depressed, that would be ideographic. That would be unto yourself. Okay? So nomothetic would be what we call the base case, right? That would be the general case, what we would expect. Ideographically would be the exception to the rule. Does that make a little bit more sense? Yeah, and you find that when we're starting to look at things, we take it in here, the normative approach, we're expecting inherently that when we're speaking to someone, some sort of normative, nomothetic kind of approach, right? And if we see something that's weird, we start to kind of shift gears, whether we know it or not, and say, uh-oh, there's something ideographic going on. So as Fritz Heider said, everybody is a naive social scientist. Now I get to show off a little bit, right? Fritz Heider said, everyone is a naive social scientist, meaning we're always making decisions about people and events and assigning characteristics to them. Okay? Very elegant, very simple, right? 23 words or less. He kind of calls it the way it is, right? All right, so Fritz Heider, okay, give him credit. So that's the normative approach. What am I seeing? And do I think this is more nomothetic? Is it more of a standard base case? So if you saw the funniest comedian in the world and someone said like, yeah, I chuckled, you know, it wasn't the, whatever, it was kind of funny, you know, not my taste, but yeah, I could see the value of the humor in it. You wouldn't say that person's ideographic. You're like, okay, now it's a cup of tea, okay? So it's more normative. He was still within the normative thing. Ipsative, what does it say there? Text data's response to the presumed string of interface are interpreted relative to the strength metric for that same individual. Ipsative is more ideographic, right? It's unique unto that person. Well, he's always late when you ask him to go somewhere. That would be ipsative, right? Oh, he always cries at AT&T commercials. It's ipsative. Whatever ridiculousness I'm trying to come up with. Okay, but the point is, this once again is another way to look at nomothetic things. Base case, typical, right? No problem here. Saying like, well, this is just more internal to this person. Okay, that's what we're looking at here, and you have to make those distinctions. Because once again, I'm going to repeat it 1,000 times. You got a person sitting across from you, a real live living person, right? And it's like, you got to use TLC here, you know what I mean? Handle with care. And all your goal is going to be is to say, how do I take this information from an objective point of view and build and use my assessment tools and my acumen to build a better therapeutic relationship to help somebody. That's the payout. You know what I mean? That's God's work, if you will, okay? Without invoking deity. But it's important stuff, right? I respect that. Okay, so issues in personality development. Personality system relies exclusively on self-reporting. I told you, it's false outcomes. People lie. And they don't lie because they're liars, maybe they are, but they lie because they want to be seen in a good point of view. Okay, they want to have a good thing about them. Okay, so we build in these validity scales so we can assess whether the truth will bubble up. So a validity scales asks the questions about the same dimension, kind of probes it in many different ways. So the truth will eventually come out. Okay, you can only hide behind the curtain so much until it all comes out with the crying and the box of tissues, right? Okay. And here's the other thing. These are more things, as I say, from a musical point of view, you call it a leitmotif. But these are the thematic things. Logic and reason dictate what we think is going on in there. Use a little common sense. Use the tools around you. It doesn't all have to be textbook, right? Nuance and pivot, nuance and pivot, nuance and pivot. Okay? Have a good understanding of how to test things, content-oriented stuff. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about here. Okay, personality measures, data reduction methods, very important tool. Okay, this is the statistical end of it. And just let me talk about this. There's like a million slides about data reduction. This is not a class in psychometrics. Okay, this is not a class in how to construct tests. This is a class of practical application of saying, I have this whole closet here filled with tests and assessment tools, and they all do different things, but what's general about them, what's nomothetic about them, if you will, is that you handle the process that you use to handle them are all the same. Okay, that's your generalization. And what data reduction does, it distills down from many things to a theme. So for instance, if I have a test and I'm looking at introversion and extroversion, let's sit down for a second. What do? We take people who we know are introverted people and we give them this test. Oh no, we just take, let's say 500 people and we give them a test that has both questions tapping into introversion and extroversion. Okay, let's say I did all the prep work, okay? Now I have all these questions. How do I know which questions really tap into that? Right, from a face content validity point of view, you know, I can come up with that. I prefer to be by myself. I enjoy being in the company of other people. I'd rather go out and do stuff than sit home. Okay, so you can come up with stuff like that. So now I got all these 50 questions. Which questions drive introversion? Which questions drive extroversion? Okay, you don't know. So what they do is they take all the questions, put it in the hopper, and what they do is they do what's called data reduction or factor analysis. I talked a little bit about factor analysis here. Now think about it. If I have 50 questions and I distill it all down, what am I distilling down? 50. I'm looking at the relationship between each of the 50 questions. Okay, follow me. Let me just walk with me on this. I got 50 questions, yeah? Now I'm going to look at the relationship between question 1 and question 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 5, 1 and 6, 1 and 50. Then 2 and 3, 2 and 4, 2 and 5, 2 and 50. Each one of them have a correlational relationship to each other, don't they? So what factor analysis does, it says instead of looking at 50 different things, I'm going to drill it down based upon the relationships that they have in there with the magic, right? If they have ties or whatever, don't even bother with that, right? It's going to say, this first bucket has these 10 questions very closely related to each other. The second bucket has this set of questions closely related to each other. The third, the fourth, and the fifth until it runs dry, right? Now, is it easier for me to think about 50 separate things or to think about 4 or 5 separate things? I'm going to go with 4 or 5 different buckets as opposed to 50 separate things, right? So what I have to do in a data reduction is here's where the art comes into the science, right? It's like I'll have these first, let's say these first 10 questions, and I'll look at the questions, and I have to decide what they have in common. I got to give it a name. All right? So that's what you got to do. And then you'll have that, and you'll see these main primary characteristics coming out to say this is among the characteristics that are the most stable. And that's what data reduction does. It allows us to look at this great amount of research, right? And then drill it down into basic, larger buckets and chunks. Because the human mind, yeah, we can handle 50 different things. But why do we have to when we can look at 4 or 5 different things? You know, I like, you know, we all work hard, but we have to work much more efficiently. Okay, so that's why I love data reduction. Have less things to worry about. Okay, well-known methods. Cattell in the 40s. Gordy Alport, okay, came down and they did factor analysis, and boom, they came up with 16 personality factors. Isn't that cool? I think so. 16 PF. Okay, 16 dimensions that they found based on all this data, all these different answers to questions. They threw it into the big magical box, shook it up, and out popped 16 independent or orthogonal, they got to use the word, dimensions. I think that's amazing. Now, one of my professors, Dr. Roy Asuli, may he rest in peace, worked with Cattell, the University of Illinois, in Illinois, and that's where he kind of made his bones a little bit too, Dr. Lilly. Okay, and he was a big factor analysis guy, so it's like my homage to him to mention. You know, that's my homage to him since he's no longer with us. Okay, but the factor analysis, the data reduction, is a technique where you take a whole bunch of stuff, think of like in sociology, I don't know, me or and like all this like confusion and like all this like the pattern is in there, but we can't see it. Throw it into the magical box, do the factoring, and all of a sudden clarity appears. And you know that within these 16 dimensions, these 16 personality factors, they are not related to each other. They are independent of each other. They don't mix. So there's no correlation between them, between the 16 of them. They're all unique. And if you have unique factors, what does that mean? It means that there's no coloring outside the lines. So depending upon which of these 16 PFs you're on, that's going to be the purest element of getting to that dimension of what you have. The magnitude once again comes into play, yeah? And can you use that information when you're trying to figure out, get into the head of the person sitting across from you? Yeah, it's a very powerful tool. I mean, I'm trying to preach a little bit of my bully pulpit here, but it's a very powerful tool. And you want to have that kind of powerful tool and use it correctly. So data analysis, this data reduction method is really a key on taking a lot of disparate information and crunching it together into unique, independent dimensions. And so when you do the 16 PF, and it's a paper and pencil test, I'm sure you can do it on a computer. I'm like old, so I only know from paper and pencil. It's like we had one at the university, and it was like, it was so cheap, the university. It was like, you know, they had answer sheets, you know, I came in the manual. They just kept, you know, Xeroxing the same ones where you could barely see it. There was Xeroxes and Xeroxes and Xeroxes. So I can't even read this. Will somebody buy a new set, you know, of sheets for $12? No, we don't have it in the budget. Okay, but anyway, neither here nor there. Okay, I don't want to talk about this. This is another one where they found 30 different dimensions. And I like extroversion and introversion to talk about neuroticism. I like talking about it because they're very, very salient dimensions. Everybody's got like locus of control, right? Everybody's got introversion, extroversion elements, right? And it's a very salient, very primary, in the human psyche. I like that. And the guy who started with introversion, extroversion was a guy named Eysenck. You ever hear that name? No? Okay, I know. Hans Eysank, he's a Dutch guy. He's the one who used factor analysis to identify introversion and extroversion. And you guys know who did the locus of control stuff? His name is spelled R-O-T-T-E-R, but it's pronounced Roeder. Julian Roeder. He was in Connecticut. But anyway, so, so these guys all use that same technique to identify those dimensions. I think we're just about there. I think you guys are done with me. Yeah, I think you're done with me. I think I'm done with you. Okay, so let's just call it a day on this. Let me just stop this.